Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the remainder of the Thousand Year Blood War arc of Bleach and for the Hell chapter in the video to follow. Okay, so recently we discussed what kind of role Ichigo could possibly have in the potential Hell arc, and then followed that up with a look at how Zangetsu, in his current state, could be incorporated as well. How Ichigo's powers and his relationship with them might have evolved in the 10 years between the Thousand Year Blood War arc and the present day. Next up, in looking at what the Hell arc may or may not be, we're going to take something of a detour, moving away from Ichigo to instead look at some characters who many felt were underutilized in the war against the Quincy's and yet who have already made something of an unexpected splash in the Hell chapter alone. The Espada, and by extension the Arrancar as a whole. Yes, several Espada and other more minor Arrancar joined the fight against the Vandenreich, but it never quite felt like they really reached the full scope of their potential, certainly not as a military force. And in a surprise twist, the deceased Szayelaporro, the former 8th Espada, has emerged as the early face of whatever the Hell arc's villainous threat promises to be, rising up no longer just an Arrancar, but a jailer of Hell itself. So already, it's clear the Arrancar, dead or alive, are poised to have some kind of a role in the Hell arc, but what does that really mean? How involved will they be on either side of the conflict, and who might we see joining the battle this time around? Since Szayelaporro has already made an appearance, what does that mean for the other dead Espada too? In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Espada in the Hell arc. Who might be involved, how might they be involved, and what kind of a role they could play in the future of Bleach. Remember guys, if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more just like this in the future, consider supporting the channel by subscribing. It is quick and easy to do, and it really does make a huge difference. Also, a massive thank you goes out to everyone new supporting me over on Patreon. That is going a very, very long way. Consider checking out my Patreon down in the link below and supporting me over there if you think it's worth it. If you enjoy my content enough, you can support me over there for as little as $1 a month. The $2 a month tier is the most popular, and that gets you every single one of my videos completely free of YouTube ads. But if you're just able to watch the videos and engage with them, that is already a massive help, so thank you all so very much. So, which of the Espada could actually be in Hell? Remember, there's a key difference in how the Shinigami and the Hollows end up in Hell, something we only learned as of the Hell chapter. For a Shinigami to go there, they need to have essentially captain class power, be considered a captain level spirit class, and then their soul is unknowingly sent to Hell by the Gotei 13 as per the Konso Reisai ceremony, as captain class Reishi is too dense to be reabsorbed back into the Soul Society and so has to be manually moved on. This means you're only going to find the absolute best in class Shinigami residing down in Hell. There won't be any random foot soldiers there, that's for sure. But for Hollows, well, it's different, and frankly a lot simpler. Once a Hollow is cleansed by a Zanpakuto, the sins of their past life as a human are judged. In that very moment, if they were a good person in life, they'll pass on to the Soul Society. However, if they were an evil human in life, then the doors of Hell open up and swallow them whole. We know that Shrieker, who was a serial killer in life prior to becoming a Hollow, was dragged into Hell right before Ichigo and Rukia's eyes, and we know that Szayelaporro was evil in life too, something that the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You really dives into, revealing a bit about his backstory as a sadistic alchemist, hence why he went to Hell, as was revealed in the Hell chapter. Kubo has clearly always known that Szayelaporro is just a purely diabolical person, as even back during the days of the Lost Agent arc, when promoting the 4th Bleach movie, the Hellverse, Kubo drew a non-canon story showing the origins of that movie's villain, Shuren, or at least giving us a glimpse into him and what he was up to and his plan, which also showed Szayelaporro finding himself in Hell in the immediate aftermath of his death at the hands of Mairi, quite literally falling from the sky into Hell itself. Now, while that chapter isn't canon, the much newer Hell chapter is, and, well, Szayelaporro was damned there as well. Considering once a hollow evolves and becomes a Menos, that the most dominant spirit making up the amalgamation of their soul emerges once again, we can glean a fairly good idea of what said hollow was like as a human. So on that note, which of the Espada are likely to be in hell, based on what we know? There's a few options, starting with one whom Kubo himself seems to already think would be there: Aronniero. Yes, Aronniero joins Szayelaporro in hell during the non-canon movie tie-in chapter. And yes, while it's non-canon, if Szayelaporro being in the chapter was an indicator of where he would eventually end up in canon as per Kubo's mind, I imagine the same is true of Aronniero as well. He was killed and cleansed by Rukia's Zanpakuto, and based on his personality, his greed, and how he treated Cayenne's body and used it to mess with Rukia's emotions in a genuinely horrible way, I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see him show up as another jailer of hell in the future. Then there are other fairly obvious candidates too: Yami and Neutra, both of whom were again killed and cleansed by a Shinigami's Zanpakuto, this time Byakuya and Kenpachi, and then Kenpachi again respectively, and both of whom were pretty malicious individuals as Oranka. Yami is a surefire certainty, in my opinion. It really just comes down to whether Kubo wants to bring him back or not, but in regards to this character, he absolutely should be in hell now. He's a monstrous, violent, unrepentant killer with no redeeming qualities whatsoever, who regards all life around him as worthless, essentially. Neutra is a little more complex for sure, but ultimately still a nasty, treacherous person with a genuine dark streak, using misogyny as a thinly veiled guise for a serious inferiority complex that's led to him ruthlessly hunting down those weaker than him, betraying his supposed allies, and more. Both of these characters could quite easily show up in hell, as far as I'm concerned. Then there's Zamari, who feels a little tougher to pin down. Yes, he was killed and cleansed by Byakuya's Zanpakuto, but how evil did he really seem? And obviously evil is a very, heavy and extreme word to use. His zealous devotion to aizen stemmed from the idea that Shinigami had no right to hunt down hollows as uniformly as they do, as the status quo of the world that they themselves set up. And you could argue he maybe has a point, though I would counter that argument by saying that Bleach has done very little to paint the hollows as anything other than knowingly evil. Sure, there are some exceptions, but for the most part they relish in their wicked ways, while the Shinigami, as morally grey as they can be, and they certainly are inherently positioned as those in the right, willing to do the right thing. But the main point of importance here today is that Zamari's ideology isn't rooted in evil. Now that being said, his seemingly magnanimous facade does slip occasionally, and it's pretty clear that he enjoys trying to make Byakuya suffer, and attempts to humble the captain. It's fairly obvious to me that Zamari enjoys watching Byakuya struggle against him, watching him injure himself to free himself from Zamari's amour. He targets the defenseless Rukia to use against her brother too, but I mean, you could argue that's just Zamari attempting to survive and win a fight against a tough opponent, who did have a weakness present and ready to be exploited. In that sense, Zamari is definitely a tough one, and I could see him showing up, but again, it really depends on if Kubo even wants to go that route and bring him back at all. It's not like Zamari is a particularly popular character. Look, at least in my opinion, those are the Espada who are most likely to show up. I'd love to see Stark again, of course, but on the surface he just doesn't seem like he would have been evil in his human life, unless we've completely misjudged him, or whatever human life Stark and Lilonet's single original form had. Then there's Baragon and Ulquiorra, neither of who were purified by a Zanpakuto upon death. Baragon was killed by his own power, Respirar, which likely means his soul is completely obliterated and removed from the cycle of rebirth entirely. The same goes for Ulquiorra. Although he was slashed by Ichigo's Zanpakuto, he was ultimately finished off by Zangetsu's Sero, which eradicated much of his body before he then turned to dust. Now, you could make an argument for Ulquiorra insofar as Zangetsu being a perfect fusion of Shinigami and Hollow, so therefore maybe his Sero had Zanpakuto-like qualities to it, but sadly I just don't think that's how it works. It just means Zangetsu as a hybrid of those powers is capable of both, not that said powers are themselves a mix of, well, said powers. It doesn't mean his Sero attacks are suddenly purifying souls like a Zanpakuto can, though I could be wrong, and I'd be more than open to seeing Ulquiorra again. Meanwhile, the Espada who show up in the Thousand Year Blood War arc are Grimjo, Neliel, and Harabel, the survivors of the previous war, although Harabel is promptly defeated by Yhwach and imprisoned for the entire arc. Sadly, Waco Mundo simply doesn't play as big a role in the fight against the Quincy's as we'd have liked, though Grimjo manages to sneakily kill a couple of Sternritter, which I guess isn't bad going. Meanwhile, although she finds a way to remain in her adult form indefinitely and travels up to Varvelt with Ichigo and the others, Neliel doesn't really do anything at all, though I'm hoping the anime might show her rescuing Harabel from the dungeons in Core 4. Crucially though, these Espada represent the new age of Waco Mundo and its relations with the Soul Society, specifically Harabel and Neliel, the two former Third Espada, now essentially running the world of the Hollows and keeping everything in check. Whatever the case, it's pretty much a guarantee that they will be evolved in the Hell arc in some fashion. Although this is just a guess on my part, it currently looks as though Hell threatens to spill over and envelop every world of Bleach now that the gates have been forcibly thrown open, so the Arrancar are going to find themselves embroiled in the conflict once more. There's not much to speculate on here. I imagine all three of these Espada will be involved in the new story arc, even if it's only to defend Waco Mundo itself. The only question is whether or not they'll actually be given a little more to do on the grand stage this time around. And I certainly hope so, because from what we can see from the Bleach X calendar from a couple of years back, they're all sporting brand new designs as well. And to be completely honest, Grimjo and Harabel's new looks in particular are two of my favourites from this current set. Harabel's feels perfect in that it shows her seemingly taking up and embracing the mantle of the Queen of Waco Mundo, while Grimjo's feels like a sleek and natural evolution of his Thousand Year Blood War arc look. I'm not so sure about Nell's new design and feel we need a better look at it, but I wasn't a massive fan of her adult look in the Thousand Year Blood War arc either. It feels a bit messy to me, but there we go. As for the other Arrancar involved in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't see the likes of the Privarone Espada again, why we wouldn't see the return of characters like Lupi after he played such a, well, for him anyway, big role in Can't Fear Your Own World. Lowly and Menely feel a little less likely, considering you have to imagine the power differential being increased yet again, and they were already totally useless against Kirige. But going back to the Hell arc specifically, what kind of role are we going to see the Espada take on during this new potential arc? Well, let's begin by looking at the one Espada that we've actually already seen in the arc, as I think they give us the best idea of what to expect, Szayelaporro himself. Szayelaporro appears to be operating from an interesting place in the Hell chapter. Of course, we've got no idea what kind of hierarchy or organisation currently exists within Hell and the denizens of Hell, if any. But it does kind of seem like Szayelaporro is working alone in this chapter, taking advantage of the breakdown between worlds now that the gates have been opened to slip through and try to cause some trouble. He doesn't appear to have any kind of specific directive and isn't following orders. Instead, he seems to only make a physical appearance, actually on the battleground, because he realises Renji is there, and goes out to meet him. Once there, Szayelaporro, true to his character, makes room for some theatrics, and takes the opportunity to gloat at Renji before trying to kill Ichika. And as far as we can tell, yes, Szayelaporro has a new look, yes, he has some new abilities, but he has retained his personality and he has retained his memories in full. Whether he has retained his Arrancar abilities or not, that we don't know. Now, one element that really got people talking was Szayelaporro's revelation, his piece of dialogue, that the jailers of hell, or gallows of hell, as they're known in the Viz translation, are clairvoyant, and he's able to deduce that Ichika is Renji's daughter, despite having never seen her before that moment. Now, I've always wondered how literally we're supposed to take this, because if I'm being honest, it's not that big a leap to make that this girl, who has basically the exact same hair as Renji and is clutching at his leg, is his daughter. Like, I feel you don't need to be clairvoyant to work that out, but despite that, Szayelaporro does seem to possess a lot of knowledge about the nature of hell, and even the Soul Society's own customs that he shouldn't know at all, such as the Konso Reisai ritual, and the fact that the doors of hell were being held shut by Yhwach and Aizen's combined power, and have opened now that those powers have subsided. To be fair, again, this is all information he could have been informed of over the last 12 years or so that he's been in hell by the time of the hell chapter, presumably. But still, if that's the case, then someone in hell is informing him of what's going on above ground. Somebody is informing him, as Yamamoto's soul was sent to hell, as Unohana's soul was sent to hell in the wake of the Quincy Blood War. Oh, this is because of the Shinigami's Konso Reisai, those fools. They keep sending captains down here. Now, it could be one of the old captains, one of the original Gotei 13, who long ago figured out that this was why they ended up here. And so they're now passing that knowledge on, but we've got no idea. And speaking of which, I guess one thing Szayelaporro does seem to know that maybe he otherwise wouldn't or shouldn't is not only Ukitake's immediate arrival, and even knowing who Ukitake is, knowing who the captain is, despite having never met him before, but also knowing his newly bestowed Hell epithet as well. And speaking of which, I'm definitely most curious about any kind of hierarchy within Hell itself and what role the Espada might play in that. Because it seems like the moment Ukitake arrives in Hell, he stabs Szayelaporro through the back and drags him into the underworld. Now, why is that? For Ukitake to drag a so-called jailer back into hell the moment he arrives there is very interesting to me. Did he do it to interfere and help out Ichigo? Or is he doing it because someone of his power ends up in a high position in hell and Szayelaporro is now practically his underling? Or is he trying his best simply to contain hell itself? That depends entirely on how much of a captain's personality is retained once they go to hell. Szayelaporro has retained his personality, but he was already evil to begin with. But ultimately, the Espada who went to hell, or at least the ones we think went to hell, are mostly going to be considerably weaker than the captains that we expect to be there, who include Yamamoto, Unohana, and maybe the original 13 as well. Szayelaporro being positioned as a jailer of hell implies that there are prisoners that he is kind of ruling over, but Ukitake certainly doesn't seem likely to be one, despite just being cast into hell himself in that moment. Either that or some kind of civil war is underway in hell itself. Again, I find it hard to believe the captains that I just listed would take any kind of order from the Espada. In my opinion, and this is complete speculation, if anything, it feels like it would be the other way around. So here's my vague overview for how Hell's hierarchy currently looks based on virtually nothing. The majority of Hell is made up of Hell's denizens, low-level prisoners, or Togabito, such as the likes of Shrieker, for example, and presumably those mysterious Hell Hollows that we also see in the Hell chapter. They presumably came from Hell, and therefore they do seem to be kind of foot soldier rank. These guys are ruled over by the jailers of hell, which I think could end up being mostly made up of former Espada. These guys, like Szayelaporro, are stronger than the average prisoner for sure. But above the jailers, I then wouldn't be surprised to find the captains, maybe even now being referred to as wardens or something like that. Stronger than the Espada, or the Espada who went to hell anyway, these captains, who have even been given titles befitting their status, Court Guard Founder, Death Sword, and Kamikake Godsworn, are essentially in charge of the jailers, but maybe they have an antagonistic relationship with them, hence Ukitake impaling Szayelaporro. Or it could simply be that Szayelaporro wasn't supposed to have left for the real world, and so was being dragged back. If we ever do get another chapter of this arc, we could quickly learn that when Szayelaporro returns to Hell, we see that Ukitake has retained his sense of self and was trying to help Ichigo, and is quickly overwhelmed by whoever else is in there, the captains or the other Espada, as they try and teach him the real way of things there now. And Ukitake is shocked and horrified to see Yamamoto and Unohana there actually ingratiated within Hell itself. But honestly, the whole thing is a little weird. Szayelaporro knowing of Ukitake, and even knowing of the relationship between Ichigo's substitute badge and the fallen captain, is definitely odd, and we're in need of some explanations. I'm very curious to discover how these relationships and dynamics actually work in Hell. Are all these disparate prisoners being ruled over by one supreme entity? Have the ancient captains, the oldest captains, the original 13, effectively taken control of Hell for themselves at this point, having proven themselves in a show of strength, which is likely how Hell is probably going to work? Maybe the original 13 were waiting for the return of Yamamoto and Unohana all this time. But we're getting off track. Dialing back and looking specifically at the Espada, it definitely feels to me like they are primed to be the underlings this time around, for much more sinister and dangerous villains. Though that doesn't mean that they haven't been empowered themselves too, having now become jailers. As for the living Espada, well, like I said, I fully expect them to take up arms alongside their newfound allies once again. If Neutra does return as a jailer of Hell, then I imagine a rematch between him and Neliel is on the cards, maybe even involving Harabel as well. It depends if Kubo goes down the route of having the fallen villains seek out those that they have grudges with, as Szayelaporro kind of did. Now, there's normally at least one villain who massively miscalculates the situation and gets killed in one hit, right? So maybe this time around that's Aroniero. As a jailer of Hell, upon escaping, he tries to find and exact revenge upon Rukia, only for her to now take him out immediately, having become considerably stronger since they last fought, having achieved bankai, having been to the royal palace, and becoming a captain. I know a lot of people like to point to Szayelaporro now being capable of overwhelming post-Thousand Year Blood War arc Renji and seemingly battling Ichigo, but realistically neither of them were fighting him even remotely properly. Neither of them were even giving him their full attention. But absolutely the most interesting aspect of the Espada right now is what form the villainous ones might take in the new arc. Also, it could very well be that Szayelaporro is the only one who was sent down, though I highly doubt that. But what does all of this mean for the future of Hueco Mundo itself? Hueco Mundo is interesting in that, as of the light novels, it has kind of become the home, a haven, for several of these new, almost misfit characters, and actually getting to see Hueco Mundo involved in the story in the present day would be a very fast way of seeing what Kubo intends to do regarding the light novels, if anything, in regards to canonicity. Because by the time of the Hell arc, characters like Aura and Roka should be fully ingrained within the upper leadership of Hueco Mundo, while characters like the Picaro are involved too. But if they make no appearance and there's no mention of them in future manga material, what does that mean? How could the wider Hueco Mundo get involved, especially when it feels like so many of them, even the top ruling Espada of the day, are outclassed by many in the Gotei 13 and beyond, and that likely includes those who are currently in Hell. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which Espada are you expecting to see return in the Hell arc, if and when it hopefully ever happens? What kind of role are you expecting those returning Espada to play? What does it mean to be a jailer of Hell? What does this mean for Szayelaporro? What can we glean from the small appearance he gets in the Hell chapter, which ironically is perhaps the most revealing part of the chapter in itself? How does he know so much? What new powers and abilities does he have? Is he working for anyone? or is he operating entirely on his own? What does the whole situation with Ukitake mean? I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below, because there's quite a lot to talk about. Alright, but again, thank you so very much for being here and watching. I really do appreciate the support. Consider hitting subscribe down below. It's quick, it's easy, and it's free to do, and it's a fantastic way of helping to support the channel, helping to keep us growing, get us more exposure. I'd love to hit 300,000 subs by the end of the year. I think it's definitely doable, but it's only doable with your help, so again, your support would be greatly appreciated. Share the video around with your friends as well, and also consider supporting me over on Patreon too. A massive shout out to all of my new patrons over there. Thank you so very much. But of course, a massive everlasting thank you to everyone who's been supporting me over there since the very beginning as well. If you want to take your support for the channel another step further, Patreon is absolutely the best way of doing so, especially when things can be a little shaky here on YouTube at the moment. It really is a big help. You can support me for as little as $1 a month over there. The $2 tier is the most popular one, but $1 a month gets you a shout out in the credits of every single video, whereas $2 and higher gets you every video of mine absolutely free of YouTube ads. And I am looking at adding more perks in the weeks to come, so stay tuned for that as well. Alright guys, but once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.